goddamn military.
The
And
Pentagon,
I'm fucking livid that we are stuck in the timeline where Alex Jones is right. Hey, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Before we get along to our guest today, normal everyday housekeeping. A big shout out and thanks to our everyday sponsor, SneckSwag.com. Head over and get all your favorite Liberty merch. If you head over today, free shipping on all U.S. orders, and you can pick up my favorite, my personal favorite, the Drop Acid, not bombs. On sale today, starting at just $17.95. And again, free shipping in the U.S. for all orders from SneckSwag.com. So head over and check it out today. Now I'm going to get to bringing on our guest, and our brief introduction here. Everybody knows her. Everybody loves her. Everyone's favorite libertarian, Jess Mears. Hey, Jess, how are you?
I'm so good. How are you?
I'm great. So how was you? You were just at Freedom Fest and doing all sorts of stuff this past weekend, living liberty, right?
Yeah, I've had a great couple weeks. My goal right now is to have the best summer ever, especially after coronavirus last year. So I spent last Saturday, I was at the We Are Libertarians pool party in Newcastle, Indiana with the We Are Libertarians podcast network. That was really awesome. Had a great time. Big shout out for Chris Spangle for being the host of We Are Libertarians and creating that community that he's built over the years. And it was a really good time. So I was really glad to be able to be part of their summer pool party. And then I went to this past week, I was at Freedom Fest, and basically it was awesome. It was like all my friends in one place, and I had a great time. I was in South Dakota, and I really dislike the state of South Dakota because I spent I went there in 2016 with Bill Weld. I went there with Gary Johnson. I went there in 2020 with Joe Jorgensen. So I've been out to South Dakota 3 times now, and now four because it was Freedom Fest was in South Dakota. And I understand that the Freedom Fest organizers, they tried to plan their festival in Nevada last year, but it got shut down by the state. So they didn't want to deal with that again. So they moved it to South Dakota, where they knew the state wasn't going to shut down their conference. But I don't want to go to South Dakota ever again.
What's so bad about South Dakota? I mean,
okay,
what is it that makes you hate it?
When I went the first time, I was living in Pinellas County, Florida, and my county in Florida had more population than the entire state of South Dakota. It's just a very different way of life than what I'm used to. And gotta love the people that love driving miles and miles and miles to anything that they need. But that's not the life for me. I'm more into urban living, and at least I am very self-aware.
Now, I've heard a lot of mixed reviews about Freedom Fest coming from libertarians across the spectrum. Some people thought it was the greatest thing in the world. Other people are complaining that it's turned into CPAC West with more of a conservative bent to some things and some of the vendors. People like JP Sears making jokes about shooting people because of their pronouns.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I watched his comedy, his stand-up, and when there were a few times where I was just like, whoa. Yeah, it was a little uncomfortable, and he made some offensive jokes, but yeah, that happened. And so I'm actually going to be recommending to Freedom Fest some people that I think that they should consider next year. One thing I took away from it was it wasn't CPAC West. There were a lot of people there that are libertarians. Joe Jorgensen's voters, there were a lot of people there that voted for her. And there were, of course, some Trump supporters there. But this was not at all like what we saw with CPAC with like the gold bronze statue of Trump being wheeled around. That did not exist at Freedom Fest. It really, like I had conversations with people, and there were, I mean, out of the exhibitors and the speakers, if you look at the speakers list, like their MC for Freedom Fest was Dave Smith, somebody that is presumed to be running for president in 2024. Spike Cohen, one of the panels I was on, Scott Moorfield with Town Hall, he said that Spike Cohen's speech that he gave at Freedom Fest made him want to run through some walls.
That's why I had to ask. I'm seeing these criticisms from some of my more
I'm gonna give it my full endorsement of it was well worth my time to go. I didn't go for work. I was there. I'm a board member for Feminists for Liberty. So I went to volunteer and table for Feminists for Liberty. And I was lucky to be added on some panels. So I got to speak on some panels with about the non-aggression principle and about civil disobedience. So the one on civil disobedience was with Spike Cohen and Austin Peterson. And it was awesome because like, these are guys that I know. I helped Austin Peterson run for president in 2016, and I was Spike Cohen's deputy campaign manager. So it's like, this was really a cool opportunity for me to be able to be featured alongside people that have a much more public profile than I do. But like, I'm kind of like a strategist behind the scenes, and they were able, like, I was able to be elevated. But I do think that there's more opportunity for women to be more visible. So I'm going to be giving that feedback to Freedom Fest. Like Kat Timpf is an awesome comedian. I don't think she would make jokes about shooting people. Like, so I'm going to be recommending, like, why not have Kat Timpf featured? And maybe, so I think that's a good thing. Like the organizers of feedback, or the organizers of Freedom Fest and organizers of anything, they always want feedback. So I'm going to share my feedback, but overall, awesome conference. Jeff Hewitt, Kara Scholes, Marshall Burt, they were on a panel on a main stage. Like, that's awesome. That's amazing. I'm really, really happy and really pleased.
Now, you touched on the idea of maybe highlighting more women there and more women in the liberty movement. That's one of the biggest criticisms that is heard in the liberty movement, the Libertarian Party, especially internally, is the lack of representation of women as part of the population. I remember when I helped organize the speakers for Liberty Forum a couple of years ago, right before the pandemic, I'd invited you, Ovens, Elizabeth Nolan Brown, and I had stacked the speaker list with just some of the best women in the liberty movement I knew. And somebody early on, when we were selling tickets, accused me of trying to organize a taco fest, and said that it was going to be awful that I was including women just to include women, and where I didn't realize that I had 80% of the speakers list being women until that complaint came through. But then afterwards, people were resoundingly hailing that it was the best Liberty Forum they'd ever attended.
It was awesome. I had a great time.
So hopefully we're getting Liberty Forum back, because Liberty Forum didn't happen in 2021 because the Free State Project couldn't find a venue to host it. But we did have Pork Fest both years, last year and this year. You came to Pork Fest as well, another part of your best summer ever tour.
It was awesome. I had so much fun.
Were your conservative coworkers cool with Pork Fest? I know there was a point where people were wondering, oh, AFP's showing up. I wonder if they're going to like what we do at Pork Fest.
Yeah, well, it goes both ways. Were the Pork Festers happy to have AFP there? And I think so. I think AFP did a great job going to Pork Fest and sharing with people what we do. And also the Pork Fest attendees, like, I gave a talk about how to impact your elected officials. And it was a really cool experience for me because there were 4 or 5 New Hampshire, either current or prior legislators there. So instead of my talk being mostly me talking, I got to be like, wow, like, you guys are legislators. Why don't you tell us what's impacted you? And so I almost like got a chance to give the speaking opportunity to people who have the experience being a legislator. And so that means more. And it says more about how to impact a legislator when it comes from somebody that's actually doing that work. So that was an awesome experience, kind of one of my favorite moments at Pork Fest. And One of my favorite moments at this past Freedom Fest, it was really fun. Since I went, like I didn't go for work, I went pretty much like on my own because I wanted to experience what this was like. I was sitting at a table with Chris Thrasher, Jeff Hewitt, Boomer Shannon, and Apollo Pizzell. And Boomer does this joke where he made a joke about like, so have you ever heard about the egg on the head? And he like went like this and he like pretended like he dropped an egg on Apollo's head. And we just all like sat there laughing because it was just so silly and goofy and funny. And it was a really nice moment where like I don't think I've laughed that hard in a long time. So being at Freedom Fest with people that I've worked with for a number of years and just, laughing, it was so fun and really solidifying to me to know that like my community is something like I've been involved with the libertarian movement since 2007. And I know that's what we're going to get into today is we're going to talk about what our experience has been like in the movement. So how about I start with like how I got involved and then you share
Absolutely.
how you got involved and then we'll dive into it. All right.
Sure.
So I signed up for Facebook in 2006. And when it prompts you to fill out your information, it was like your political affiliation was one of the things. And I didn't know what my political affiliation was. So I did the world's smallest political quiz and I did some research and I was like, cool, libertarian, that sounds great. And when I really kind of got to my freshman year of college and I kind of wanted to get involved politically, I realized there wasn't a libertarian campus club. There was like college Democrats and stuff, but I built out a college club and I got involved with the state party. I was a secretary of the Libertarian Party of Ohio. I moved to Florida. I was involved with the Libertarian Party of Florida with the executive committee. I founded a county affiliate. I founded a libertarian club at a retirement community that I lived in when I lived in the Villages, Florida. I was like vice chair of my Pinellas County affiliate. When I moved around kind of a lot in Florida. I lived in 3 different cities. And so everywhere I've been, the liberty movement has always been part of my life. And especially the Libertarian Party has been a big part of my life. And in 2016, I got a chance to work on the Gary Johnson campaign when they needed help afterwards. And what I have learned in my time as being an operative is that anybody who can do what they say they will do ends up being able to take on a lot more work and responsibility. So just doing what I said I would do put me in a position where I got to work for the Gary Johnson campaign. I got to work for the Libertarian Party for 4 years with the National Party. And then I got to be the deputy campaign manager of Joe Jorgensen's campaign. So I have really kind of gone from a volunteer in the Libertarian Party and a volunteer leader to a paid professional. And so that's given me since 2007, a very robust experience, but I have a lot of experiences, good and bad. And that's why Justin invited me on today we're going to get into the good and the bad. But Justin, what has been kind of like your experience journey? So when we get into it, people kind of know where you came from.
So my path to the Libertarian Party is a lot more dramatic. It's a lot more dramatic and very literally a lot more explosive. In 2012, I voted for Gary Johnson, not because I identified as a libertarian, but because I had previously worked for Mitt Romney and I thought the guy was an asshole. And I just didn't want to vote for Mitt Romney. I lived in Massachusetts. Republicans had no chance of winning Massachusetts anyways, even though Mitt Romney was our governor. So I said, fuck it. And I voted for Gary Johnson. Started paying attention to people on the internet like Rand Paul, Julie Borowski, and some of the internet libertarians while I was in college part-time and working part-time in 2013. And then when it came time for the Boston Marathon on Patriots Day in 2013, my National Guard unit was assigned the security detail for the Boston Marathon that year. And I was the highest ranking enlisted person. And so I ended up being in charge, non-commissioned officer in charge of a swath of young 18 to 20-year-old kids doing security for the Boston Marathon, and then it got blown up. And that was really like a reinforcing measure to me, though. That wasn't a distraction. I was like, okay, what we're doing is important. We need to do it. And a couple months later, 4th of July, the call came up for volunteers to do security on 4th of July in Boston. And I was one of the first people to volunteer. Again, I got there, found out I was the highest ranking person from my unit that volunteered. I'm like, what the fuck? I ended up in charge again. I had a second lieutenant with me who had just graduated college, but he came up to me right away. He's like, "You're in charge, O'Donnell. What do we do?" I'm like, fuck. But running security with Boston Police, State Police, DEA, FBI, ATF, 34 local police departments were called in for mutual aid to provide additional people. TSA was setting up checkpoints throughout the city of Boston. We had mobile camera units all over. It was an occupation of the city of Boston. And at one point around lunchtime, I remember I was walking from one checkpoint to another with my second lieutenant in tow, so we could deliver water to people at the checkpoints. And somebody sits down in front of us in a lawn chair and starts reading a book, just blocking the sidewalk, right underneath a mobile camera unit too. It was really weird setting, but I'm just like, what the fuck? And the lieutenant immediately starts yelling at him. He's like, "You're going to be detained. You're going to be arrested. You need to move." And the guy just keeps reading his book. And then I just burst into tears laughing. I'm like, what the hell? And the lieutenant looks at me. He's like, "What's so funny?" I'm like, "He's reading 1984. And then over the course of me having to then explain why that was funny and explaining the plot of 1984 to this college graduate second lieutenant, I came to the realization like, oh, we're the bad guys. And that's when I got, after that mission, I went back. I'm like, I'm not re-enlisting. I'm ending my contract this year. I'm getting out of the Army, finished school, went into the private sector instead. And then really didn't know what the hell I was doing for a couple of years because my degree is in emergency management and homeland security, and I was refusing to take government work. And then in 2016, the Gary Johnson campaign, they put out a call for petitioners and volunteers after the convention. I said, screw it. Reached out to Dan Fishman and Chris Crawford in Massachusetts and ended up being the top petitioner in all of New England, petitioning in Maine, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts to help get Gary Johnson on the ballot. And a year later, I was on the LNC. Just it was a wild ride, through volunteering for the Libertarian Party in Massachusetts. They elected me to the state committee. We did great work there with Dan and Chris and the other people there. And when I moved to New Hampshire, right as Larry Sharp had resigned from the LNC, everyone in New England had gotten to know me by that point, and they elected me to replace him on the LNC. And I did 2 terms on the LNC, and now I'm here. Again, trying to figure out where we're going from here, because I actually got sick of the party politics. I got sick of the inside the party baseball, and the fact that it is all consuming of our lives and our social lives, and any little party drama infects your social circles and just eats away at you. And so I have taken a step back from the party. I still support them. I'm still a lifetime member of both the Libertarian Party and the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire. But I'm more focused on my local nonprofit work here in New Hampshire.
Yeah.
So a bit more dramatic than being a late bloomer to Facebook.
Yep. So, so let's see. I've been doing libertarian activism for how many years now? 14. That's so many years. Right.
One of the things, when I was on the LNC and I was traveling, going to conventions, and I started to realize how close everyone was in their state parties. Yeah. And at first I'm like, this is great. It's not just a political party. It's not just a movement. It is a community. And that's one of the things I love about New Hampshire. But the libertarian community here in New Hampshire is actually largely apolitical, and it crosses boundaries. We've got libertarian Democrats, we've got libertarian Republicans, we've got LP people, we've got non-voting anarchists and agorists who all get together. And so the successes and the drama of the party don't necessarily affect the community. Whereas I started to see in other states when I was visiting and speaking at conventions that any little drama in the party would affect everyone's friendships and their relationships. And it all hinged on the success of the party, because everyone got so dedicated and so involved in the LP, they lost sight of everything else in their life.
Do you ever feel like when you're at an event, if 2 people are seen with another talking, that all of a sudden people are like, oh, well, those two were like talking to each other. Like, do you know what I mean?
Right.
And like that kind of mentality I think is really unhealthy, where it's like we should be encouraging people to work with each other, to understand one another, for civil discourse and dialogue and healthy relationships. But too many people are like, this person is friendly with this person, so I can't associate with them because of they're associating. And it's like, why does this have to be this way?
Well, that was a big part of what happened in New Hampshire with the recent Libertarian Party drama in New Hampshire. I had made good friends with Reed Coverdale through the online and us communicating back and forth, and started to get along with Dave Smith and be friendly with Dave Smith. And I started reaching out to the Mises Caucus people here in New Hampshire just because we're trying to recruit and grow the party. And started realizing, I'm like, hey, you know, all the bad flack, all the talk, all the nonsense that people are like holding against Dave Smith and the Mises Caucus, it falls flat once you get to know them. Like none of it holds up to any base scrutiny. And just by being friendly with them, with Nolan Pelletier, the new chair of the Libertarian Party in New Hampshire, just by being friends with him and helping them get involved in the party, just by being friends with Dave Smith and talking to him regularly, just by going on Reed's podcast and saying that I wasn't antagonistic to the Mises Caucus, a lot of my old really good friends in New Hampshire have distanced themselves, disassociated, and declared me an enemy.
Yeah. And it's sad. It's really sad when it's like, why can't we just all, you know, realize that the liberty movement is the liberty movement we owe it to the liberty movement to overcome our personal issues with one another, to engage in discourse. Like it's really sad when people act like children, and it's very like the liberty movement can be super cliquey at times, where it's like, why does it need to be a clique? And I was talking with Michael Heiss very, very briefly at Freedom Fest, and I didn't mean to be rude, and I hope it wasn't, but I said, you know, I think caucuses are stupid. I'm not pro caucus, but I don't care if they exist or not. It doesn't matter to me. I will work with anyone to do good, and whether or not they have a caucus affiliation or not. It's like, so I didn't mean to be offensive if I did offend him, but I also just I don't think we need to get caught up in who's associated with what caucus. And instead, like, it's like, can we just look at people as individuals? As libertarians, can we realize that everyone's an individual? Is that possible as libertarians?
You'd think it'd be possible.
Yeah, you would think it would be possible to identify a person as an individual rather than a collective.
Right. But no, that your point there about caucuses being like basically the root of a lot of the divide and the social divide in the party. One of the things that kicked off everyone coming at me, people I'd thought were friends, people I'd considered friends, is I did a podcast with Reed Coverdale and Joe Evans that we called No Caucus for Old Men, where we just sat there for an hour ranting about how here's all the problems with the Mises Caucus, here's all the problems with the Prags, here's all the problems with the Radical Caucus, here's all the problems with the Audacious Caucus. It's like the fact that your caucuses are you just dividing each other. You don't realize how much you agree with each other. I'd be willing to bet if like 90% of the Prags actually read the Mises Caucus platform and talked to Mises Caucus members, they wouldn't be able to tell the difference between their own platform and the Mises Caucus platform. But just because we've created an artificial divide between them, it's created a social divide within the community, within the movement, and within the party. And it's gotten to the point where a lot of people treat the Libertarian Party and the Liberty Movement as a social club, not as a political advocacy and an activist organization. And I think we maybe need to get everyone to take a step back. Maybe it's the great reset of the Liberty Movement, where everyone shuts up, steps back, and says, oh, we need to be here to do work, not to make friends. If we make friends along the way, fine, but
awesome. Yeah. It's a benefit. It's a benefit of doing this. And I think everybody also has to realize why they're called to be an advocate for the concept of liberty. And that's something I get to do with work now, is I get to talk about how to find your story. And actually, would you mind if I use your podcast as an opportunity to share my story?
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Okay, because like this is something I've been learning about and I teach now, is why everybody's story isn't like how they found the liberty movement. Like that's something you and I just talked about, is how we found the liberty movement, but why we're called to be somebody that's involved and that does these things, it's because of something that happened to us. So when I was raised, I grew up in a small town called Lima, Ohio, and I had a single mom, and she had a job that would have normally paid the bills if the government didn't take a cut. And she didn't want to accept help when, she had 2 little girls. She was a single mom. She didn't go asking for help. She was raised to be very independent, and she was 21 years old as a mom. And what did she do? She decided to go out and get a second job and a third job. And that left my little sister and I without a parent quite often. And so Friday nights, my mom would be like security at the racetrack in town, because I grew up in Lima, Ohio, so very rural. Like Friday nights, people went and like watched people race trucks or cars or something. I don't know. I wasn't there. My mom was there working. So she did the side hustle before there was even the name for the side hustle. But that left me not doing too well without my mom around a lot. By 5th grade, I was failing in math and science, and I wasn't doing very well. In middle school, my friend Brittany, she invited me over to her home for sleepovers, and I would notice that there was a very big difference between her home and my home. On nights and weekends, she would have her mom and dad both at her home, and she invited me to her church, the Gardendale Church of God, where I met her youth pastor, Justin, his wife, Crystal, and they really became role models for me. I found a community in the church that helped me identify my own unique talents and skills that I use today as a political activist. So I started middle school as an at-risk youth, but by the time I was the summer before my 8th grade year, my mom got a call from my guidance counselor asking if I could be moved into advanced classes. So it was a church community that really supplemented me, the nurturing that I needed and that I wasn't getting at home, because my mom had to take on extra jobs because the government was stealing from her paycheck. That stolen money went to spying on us, paying you to spy on us. It went to sending men and women to war. It went to bailing out the corporations. It went to incarcerating the highest percentage of citizens out of every single country on the planet. The government was taking 30% of my mom's paycheck. So she had to go and get 30% more money because that's what she needed in order to raise our family. She shouldn't have needed a second or a third job, but she had to do what she had to do. And there's millions of single moms and dads that are in this very position today. The Bible says that it's wrong to steal. So why is it not wrong for the government to steal from us?
Well, the Bible also warned the Israelites that if they wanted a king, they'd be taxed and sent to war. So I'm not a religious person. I self-identify as an atheist, but I find it really odd when religious people come at me on Twitter saying that for God and country and kind of stuff. And inevitably, somebody will chime in and say, "You really haven't read the Bible, have you?"
So I, growing up as a kid, could have had a parent around quite a bit more if it wasn't for taxation. So when I look back at my life and how my life has been impacted, like that's, that story that I lived is one that resonates with so many people. And if you look at how the government impacts our lives, like I in 5th grade, if I didn't find like a church that helped me find myself, I could have gotten into crime, self-harm, there could have been a much worse outcome for me. And so I feel like I'm very lucky. But when I look at other people in society, other kids that didn't really have their mom or a dad around very much, how does that impact them? And it's like the government is this like crazy force that's destroying lives of people. And we owe it to future generations of kids to look past our personal differences and implement policies that are going to improve their lives. Like, if we can reduce taxation from single moms and dads that are just trying to pay for their kids. Like, my mom was able to, through working hard and doing multiple jobs, we were able to move into a nicer house. She was able to make a better life for us, but that came at the cost, the opportunity cost of spending time, quality time with us. So that's my personal story. And that's how I am called to be an advocate for libertarian ideas. And I think everybody owes it to the movement to really think about what it is that brought them to this situation. And it takes a lot of examining your past and being super honest with yourself. That's the hard part, is really being honest with what brought you here. What brought you here? It wasn't reading Rothbard. It wasn't reading Mises. It wasn't Ron Paul. Something happened in your life to cause you to be an advocate.
Yeah, Jim Bouchard.
Called.
Yeah, Jim Bouchard in his book Crazy Angry Libertarian really makes the point that there's no point in anyone's life where they just become a libertarian.
Right.
It's just a series of events, a series of experiences, and one day somebody will realize they've always been a libertarian because of the life experience that they've had. And I do think it's important to have stories. I do think it's important to be able to tell stories. And it's something that libertarians really suck at, because there are a lot of people who think of libertarianism as an academic pursuit, who wrap everything up in the Rothbards, in the Mises, in the Rands, and they don't actually think about the experience that got them to being able to accept the ideas of those philosophers and economists. Like Milton Friedman wrote some incredible stuff, but what was it in your life that made you primed to believe and accept what Milton Friedman wrote? What was it in your life that made you susceptible to hear Ron Paul's message when he was running for president? What was it in your life that brought you to this point? And I do think that we do have a couple different types of groups of people within the liberty movement. Those who do come just by the books, they just read, and they're really bad communicators. They're really great at debating and writing policy and doing the background stuff and the backroom stuff, but not so great at messaging and communicating to people who don't already agree with them, because they've never told their story. They've never even figured out what their story is. Yeah. And people don't care. When you're talking to somebody who isn't already wrapped up in the liberty movement, isn't already wrapped up in embracing a inner love of human freedom and liberty, they don't care what Hayek had to say about it. They don't care what Friedman had to say about it. They don't care what Ron Paul had to say about it. They care how it's going to affect them. And they're not going to be able to figure out how it's going to affect them unless you can tell them how it affected you, because people want to hear something from an emotional standpoint, because people are largely emotional. When you can tell an emotional story to get to the root of a problem, to identify a problem, then you get people. And I think some of the best advocates we have for liberty aren't necessarily the best libertarians. Some of the best advocates we have for liberty are these single issue activists, people who come to the Libertarian Party and the liberty movement because of a single thing. And that's their hyper focus. And they might not be the most libertarian person on other things, but they stay their lane and they focus on that one thing because that was what got them there. And that's what emotionally attached to them. And we have some phenomenal examples of this. Like Adam Kikesh came from the military as an anti-war advocate. And when he talks about anti-war and government oppression, he just stays his lane and he does it perfectly. Lynn Ulbricht came to the Libertarian Party and the liberty movement by way of fighting for criminal justice reform after her son was incarcerated as a political prisoner in the United States. And all she talks about is criminal justice reform and the abuses in the system. And she reaches so many more people than the bookworms do. Even though she doesn't talk about the other aspects of libertarianism or the other aspects of libertarian policy, she just talks about criminal justice reform. She converts so many more people than the Mises Institute does.
So we as libertarians have found that we are free to choose how to live our lives. But I think that something we often do as activists is we don't know how to set boundaries in our own lives.
No.
And that's something that if someone doesn't know how to have boundaries, then becoming a libertarian activist can be something can be quite unhealthy, and it can become disruptive to somebody's personal life. So that's something that I thought you and I could talk about, was things that we've seen, whether it's a personal experience or a friend. But I think these are stories that don't get shared enough. We don't talk about mental health in political movements and what being involved in a political movement can do to someone's mental health. And that's why I was like, let's talk about that, because nobody's talking about it. And
the burnout culture.
What is it? Burnout culture. Yeah. Burnout culture. What have you done that has caused you to get burnt out as an activist?
I got elected to the LNC.
Okay.
Dealing with the petty drama and the infighting over things that don't really matter in the grand scheme of things burned me out, and it ruined a lot of my faith in the party apparatus as opposed to the movement. Doing my best to try and work on the board, work with other board members for what I thought was the best cause of liberty, moving and advancing the Libertarian Party, got so much pushback from libertarians in the Libertarian Party that it was just draining, because people would spend more time fighting over a comma in the bylaws than talking about what the issue in the current pressing issue of criminal justice reform, or the fact that we're bombing 13 different countries at any given time, or the fact that there is a global war happening that nobody wants to talk about, or the fact that there are hundreds of thousands of people sleeping in the streets here in this country while we have more abandoned and empty homes in major cities than we do homeless people that need housing.
And real estate space.
Right. Or nobody wants to talk, like they care more about
empty malls,
about bylaws and rules than the fact that zoning laws are prohibiting the construction of new housing, and we're reproducing at a replacement rate that's higher than available housing. So there just simply are not enough places to live in major cities in this country, and it's causing catastrophic economic consequences long term. But we can't get around to talking about that because the LNC cares too much about whether or not there's an Oxford comma on page 47 of the policy manual. And that kind of stuff really burned me out and dropped me out hard. I've seen other people burn out hard after petition drives. How many people do you know that join the party after a big push, call for volunteers, they get really excited about a presidential candidate and just get burned the hell out and disappear, and you don't see them for 4 years? Right. Even though most of the actual meaningful work of the liberty movement takes place in between elections.
Or like doxing too. People doxing each other over stupid things like that. Like nobody wants to get involved in a higher purpose with like a social movement, a social change movement, or a political endeavor, to have something from their past destroy their present.
Right. And let's be honest here. If you dig hard enough, you can find something terrible about just about anybody.
About anybody. Yeah. Anybody can be canceled pretty much at any time. I mean, we're so human. Like, we are human beings and we make mistakes, and we're going to make mistakes. Like, I will make a mistake often, but it's like you learn from your mistakes and you get better and you improve. And if you're like 1% better every day, then, you know, like you'll be a better person. But we, instead of treating each other like humans, we treat each other as if we are enemies that must be annihilated.
And it's tearing, and that goes back to the social structure of the liberty movement, the fact that people aren't viewing it as the activist movement or as a mission, but rather as a social movement. They come here to make friends, they form cliques, they go to war with each other. Like how much damage has been done to the Libertarian Party over some relationships that have been broken up. Like, How often is
Mhm.
it that like two people who are dating and they're both immensely popular and they break up and it schisms the entire freaking party over a relationship breakup that nobody else was involved in?
Yeah.
So, and it's not like we're a small party. It's not there's 40,000 Libertarian Party members. There's tens of thousands of people
And
active in the
over
social media.
700,000 registered voters. Like
Right.
we do have a base of people. And then Gary Johnson had 4.5 million votes. 4.5 million people. It is a very difficult thing to mobilize 4.5 million people to do anything. I mean, you can like get 4.5 million people to watch something on TV, but to go out and vote, to register, to vote, to participate, that's a huge amount of people. And those people might be willing to get involved to make that 4.5 million votes multiply, but not when they come and find personal drama, mental health issues. Like, I think that's something I've had to work on myself, is establishing in my life my own needs for myself. I used to be overweight. I was obese. I used to do like, I didn't mind working. I used to work for the party as a
Mhm.
national office employee, and I didn't mind working well into the night, or at any time, working 16-hour days sometimes, just because I really cared about the party, and I saw that my time and energy was like helping, and it was like I was volunteering my time, I was donating my time to help the party. But it left me in a position where I wasn't taking care of myself first by giving the party the best of me, rather than giving myself the best of me, which probably would have been better for me in the long run. But I've learned, and I've established much healthier boundaries, and I think that's something that it's like, an improvement that I'm working on, and also something I wanted to just share on your podcast, because somebody
Mhm.
else that's listening may be in a similar position I am, where they're like, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm doing all of this, and then what does it leave you? Burnout activists are not conducive to getting the achievements that we need in order to have the society that we want. We need activists that are, establishing healthy boundaries, like dedicating 4 hours a month, volunteering 4 hours a month. That's something that's totally manageable. Dedicating 40 to 80 hours a month on top of full-time jobs, families, other obligations, mental health, sleep, wellness, that's not okay. So I think having this realistic expectation as to how much time somebody should dedicate to a movement, and we shouldn't be asking people to give that kind of, like, get when we notice somebody giving way too much, kind of like, hey, we'd like to, spread out this work a little bit, not putting it all on one person's shoulders. Also, what happens is, if somebody does all the work all the time for year after year, then when something happens with them, you lose all that knowledge. There's no succession
Yep.
plan.
I myself actually, like, given the recent circumstances of internal drama in the LP, I actually used that as an excuse to turn down the nomination for Region 8 rep. Two state chairs had approached me and asked if I would be nominated and go back to the LNC until the end of this term,
Yeah.
and let the delegates, because I'd served 2 terms and they trust me. And I'm like, nope, pick someone else. Like, it's
Yeah.
bad to keep sending the same people. My own state chair called me after Karen Ann Harlos recommended me for the platform committee and asked if I would accept the nomination, the state appointment for the platform committee. I'm like, nope, pick someone else, pick somebody new. Like,
Yeah.
I'm done. I did my two conventions on the platform committee. I helped draft some really big parts of the national platform. Sending me back doesn't bring a new perspective. It doesn't let anyone else get involved. Find someone else. And I also found it incredibly difficult to recruit and ask people to help petition last summer, when I'm sitting there, not only running a campaign for U.S. Senate, petitioning about 30 hours a week, running my consulting company on the side, and setting up my merchandising company. in my grand workload last summer in 2020 petitioning, while also fighting a federal lawsuit and suing the state over the petitioning requirements, I was working close to 80, 90 hours a week on Libertarian Party things. And AJ Olding, a good friend of mine, was right alongside me, helping out the whole time. And at the end of the summer, he like broke down. He's like, "I'm done. Like, no, can't do this anymore." We found it incredibly difficult to try and ask people to help us when people would ask, "Well, what do you need help with?" Well, like in general, just all of it. I need somebody to take anything off my plate. What do you want to take off my plate? It's like, but realizing that what we were asking was to offload our burden onto other people when it was our burden. And that leads to really serious burnout. And I think that's a big problem of why we have trouble retaining people. We get them all excited for an election. They come in, they help, then they're gone. And when they do see us lose and we don't win, they get so disheartened that it's right back to the Liberty Republicans or right back to the Justice Democrats. And like, okay, we want something where we know our effort, where we know all this work and all this burnout is going to be for a winning endeavor. And we're not quite there yet. Like, what did it take to get Marshall Byrd elected? The combined and dedicated total resources of the entire Libertarian Party to get a single state rep elected.
And I want to talk about Marshall Byrd real quick, because I was just with him in Freedom Fest, and he needs help. He's been elected to the state legislature as a libertarian, first person ever in like at least 20 years to do this. And now that he's elected, we haven't done this in a long time. So I know that the Frontier Project and Apollo are there to support Marshall, but he needs help much more than what he's getting at this moment. And that's something I'd like to just express, is that Marshall needs help, like even with things as booking media for him. And there's an opportunity for somebody to get some experience in learning how to just manage media booking and that kind of stuff. If somebody could do that for Marshall now, they would have on their experience history media manager for first state legislator outright elected as a libertarian in multiple decades. That's a great opportunity for somebody out there, but that doesn't exist right now. Nobody's doing that for Marshall. So somebody needs to help him, and anybody could learn how to do that. It's all just a matter of taking that burden off of him.
And I think it actually has been, I think, exactly 19 years. I think the last one was in New Hampshire, Steve Valancourt in 2002. So like that institutional knowledge has just been kind of burned out and pushed away. And even to go say, I would think he probably needs help in a hell of a lot more than just media booking. He's maybe just navigating the state house. He probably needs somebody who's knowledgeable there. And those are benches that we can't really cross support, because I have worked helping libertarian state reps in New Hampshire after they've switched parties, navigating the state house, forming caucuses, doing legislative review and stuff like that. But the process is probably so wildly different in Marshall Byrd's state that my experience would be meaningless from here in New Hampshire. Like you said, when you spoke at Pork Fest, there was a handful of current and former state reps just sitting in your talk about how to influence state reps. That's something that's very unique here. It's very easy to influence state reps here. We have 400 state reps. I have about 45 of their cell phone numbers and can call them at any time. That's not the case elsewhere. And so I'm sure he needs somebody not just for booking media. He needs somebody for comms to handle constituent concerns, somebody for legislative review to help him review everything, because we know legislatures like to pass things without giving legislators time to read them or endorse them or amend them. So it's not simple things.
And also fundraising, like the fundraising vehicle that he's going to need to get reelected in the next time around. That's getting reelected. I mean, getting somebody elected as a libertarian is like a monumental effort on its own, but getting reelected And he is going to also need help with legislation too. So somebody that's really into policy could help with legislative efforts. Maybe Marshall might have an opportunity to get tripartisan support, get both parties to support him on some kind of effort. So I think that's a huge place for somebody to get involved in something that makes a difference. 4 hours a week or so would be more than enough time to be somebody, a state legislator's volunteer media coordinator. That's yeah. And then if somebody wants, like, my experience has been, I've worked on the last 2 presidential campaigns in leadership roles, and it's been paying work. I got paid to do that. I gained a massive amount of experience. It was a lot of work, but I only was able to do this kind of stuff because I was a volunteer campaign manager in 2018 for Allison Foxall's race. I have been involved in just so much, but all the volunteering I did has ended up paying off for me, but it was a lot. I think somebody could be a little bit smarter about how they go about with their time. And that's why I'm dropping B. Marshall's volunteer media booker. When it comes time for him to get reelected, there's a great opportunity to work on that campaign or another one. That's a cool opportunity right now to be able to support him. And also Marshall may, he's going to have to make a decision if he's going to run again, if he wants to serve another term. Which party does he want to run under? Let's make sure that he feels supported and that he has people helping him, that he doesn't have to make a tough decision.
Right. And think about it big picture. We want to talk about Connor Dragotis has a phenomenal project right now trying to help people find work in the Liberty Movement, paying work to kind of ease the burden of burnout by making it your job, so you're not still trying to pay bills with something else in your other off time and increasing your total workload. Marshall Burt's campaign took the combined total resources of the entire LNC to get him elected. If he chooses to run for re-election, the Libertarian Party has kind of backed itself into a corner and is going to be obligated to throw everything they have at getting him reelected to prove that they can. That it wasn't a one-time shot and a one-time effort. That is going to be an incredibly well-funded campaign that is going to need very, very thorough paid staff to make sure it works. So volunteer now to set yourself up for that resume building paid leadership position later.
Yeah. Yeah. So hopefully somebody's listening. So let's see. Do we have any horror stories? Like, for me personally, what I have done, the sacrifices I've made, I moved from Florida. I sold my home and moved to the DC area. I lived across the street from the Libertarian Party's office and made a pretty big sacrifice in my life to do that. But it was one I was willing to do. And I think that it served me very well. I'm really happy with where things are at in my life. I've done really awesome things. And it's all because I've pursued relentlessly this dream to make the world freer through political endeavors. But it's also meant that I have friends that have been in the private sector that are much more financially ahead in their lives than I am. And so it means that I have kind of I've made this my one-shot thing that I've been after. And I've kind of learned that maybe I should have diversified my revenue streams more. We're kind of getting to a point in society where if somebody's working for someone, your financial lifeline is basically reliant upon your job, whoever you're working for. And right. I've done that. I've actually been able to make the Liberty Movement be my employer. So I've worked for organizations that do have paying positions, but I haven't necessarily looked out for myself financially. So now I'm at the point where I want to start a business so that way I have more ways of preparing for my future. I don't want to be Ayn Rand. Ayn Rand died on Social Security. I don't want that to be me. Like, that's something I've started looking at lately, is like, how am I taking care of myself? And realizing that I haven't been doing the best job at it. So, Justin, what are your thoughts on the liberty movement and libertarian activists in our own like financial pursuits?
So it's really a problem because my own horror story here. My work, my business is in healthcare risk management consulting. I help
Mhm.
I help work with insurance companies to set up their risk management profiles, their underwriting guidelines, as well as doing enrollments for their larger group rated plans with Medicare and Medicaid, especially, and dealing with the regulatory burdens that exist there. In campaigning as a libertarian for U.S. Senate and U.S. Congress over the past years, there have been several instances of me being on TV talking about repealing Medicare and Medicaid.
Yeah. That's
And
funny.
it has gone to the point where I have actually found it easier to get work as an independent contractor than applying to work for the insurance companies, because
Right.
inevitably my political history comes up, my political views come up. It's like, how can we like hire you to deal with our regulatory when you're so antagonistic towards the regulators? Like, that's a problem. So, well, if I can hide it behind my consulting company, then there's a barrier there. And so my consulting company still does a lot of consulting for healthcare risk mitigation, but it's not me anymore. I had to go and incorporate and create a barrier between myself and my work, because myself and my public persona has become so public. I don't hide anything. As we mentioned earlier, it's really easy to find dirt on anybody, anywhere. Anybody is cancelable. I took the approach when I started running for office was, I am going to be uncancelable by owning all of my dirt, by just being upfront about it and never hiding it. And so when asked about, like, have you ever had run-ins in the law? I'm like, yep. I was arrested when I was younger, did all sorts of terrible shit. I was an awful kid. Here's all the bad things you thought you could cancel me for. Oh, here's my history of drug use and addiction. Go ahead, try and cancel me for it. here's all of the problems that I overcame in my life. Go ahead and try and cancel me for them. I own them. And that has served me really well as an activist. It served me really well as a candidate. I routinely double the vote totals of other statewide candidates in New Hampshire when I run on the Libertarian Party ticket. But it has really hurt my career prospects and my ability to work in a highly professional, highly regulated field. And so, again, it's led to diversifying my income streams through multiple different avenues and getting to the point where I needed to make enough money outside of a job to support myself, and then looking for jobs elsewhere, short term and not permanent. And I have found a lot of freedom and positive mental health in self-employment, but that doesn't always work for everybody. And so there's a lot of people who really need to toe that line.
Yeah. So we've kind of talked a little bit, like I've mentioned how I used to have a weight I used to be overweight, and a lot of that was because I wasn't prioritizing exercise and taking care of myself, because I was giving so much of my time to the movement. I didn't have clear boundaries. And also like my financial health, that I've kind of given a lot of the movement my labor, and a low cost labor too, because I see it as like, a benefit to the movement. And so those are a couple ways that like I've kind of not done right by myself, and I'm trying to do better. But I think that the movement has so many positives that outweigh and why I choose to stay with it. There's so many positives. I have, in the last 6 or 7 months, received 3 life coaching sessions from Larry Sharp, where he has given me advice. And that advice I get from him, it means more to me than the advice I get from parents, from family members. I've really found in the movement people that I do think care about me. The first phone call I got after the election night in 2020, I was at the airport and about to fly, leaving the election night party, and the election night results weren't even final. Like, we didn't even know how many votes we got. Nobody called me that morning, the day after the election. The first person that called me was Larry Sharp. And like, I was in the airport crying because it was the day after the election. Like, I gave the election everything I had. I moved to South Carolina to live in the same city as Dr. Jorgensen because it's easier for a candidate to have somebody traveling with them, lining everything up, scheduling everything, kind of doing all the stuff so that person can focus on being a candidate rather than being a little bit of a tech guru and a scheduler and a logistics manager. And I worked my ass off for about 5 months on the campaign. And I was just like, drained by the end, emotionally, physically. I was tired. I was at the airport, just like having kind of like an emotional, visceral kind of like response. Larry calls me, and it's like, even then it's like, oh my God, like Larry is calling me. And I just was so glad to like hear from him. And the movement has given me people in my life that have been so awesome. Like, George and Linda in New Hampshire. George and Linda are some of the most special, dear people to me. And the opportunities I've had, I've kind of really like grown and learned more about who I am. And because I have had the movement as something that I've been pursuing. So while it's something that I've found to, be a difficult thing to navigate at times, it's also been one of the best components of my life and brought me people that I otherwise wouldn't have met. And when I look at friends that aren't politically involved, I kind of see some of them don't have what I have. Like, I feel for them because I'm like, I have something special in this movement. Like, I have you, like, you're my friend. And
Right.
The amount of like time that we invest in one another as friends, it's meaningful to me. And I value that. And I have like people in my life that they're missing something that I have. And so like, Justin, I'm curious, like some of the things that have either helped you the most that you've found through this movement or something you appreciate the most. What has it been like for you? Like we talk a little bit about the bad, but what is the good stuff for you?
I think you really nailed it. It is the people. And that's where I'm conflicted, where I think one of the biggest problems in the liberty movement is that it's a social club. But one of the biggest benefits that a lot of people do get out of it is the personal and social connections that they make through the movement by finding people who share similar ideas and similar ideals, and finding people who can like provide insight, provide coaching, provide mentoring, who come from a similar path in life. For Larry's great, actually. And again, towards the whole diversifying the income stream, making it sustainable, making your activism part of your work instead of in addition to your work.
Right.
When I wrote my book, Larry was one of the first people I reached out to for advice on marketing. And I remember going to Larry. I'm like, I just kind of want to give this away. Like I wrote this. I do sales training for a living at the time. I teach people sales techniques. I teach people how to talk to others. I teach people how to engage strangers in a sales environment. And I wrote a book on how to translate those basic skills into a political ideology and to sell your politics to people through storytelling, through proactive discovery movements, through engagement. And I'm like, I think I just want to like publish this and get it out to people, give it to every state party, give it to people, make it available for activists. Do you think you could help me fundraise to print it and publish it? And Larry's like, don't you dare give that away for free. Sell it. And it's provided an income stream. It's helped supplement a lot of what I do in with my activism because of that. And Larry made the point is like, people don't value things that are free for them. Even if you just have a nominal price tag on it, people are going to be more invested in what they're reading because they paid for it. You might get a lower audience, but the audience you have is going to be more impacted. And on the flip side, it helps supplement what you're doing with that income.
Yeah. And I think like the best thing that people can do in the movement for themselves is to find something that they're good at and do that and establish really clear boundaries. Is like, if somebody is good at leadership, be chair of a county affiliate or a state party. If you're good at writing, write policy papers, or write a platform, write a blog. If you're good at speaking, do some public speaking. If you're good at coaching, find somebody to coach. If you're good at networking, offer to do a little bit of fundraising. If you can throw an event, host an event. It's like there's really, I think in the movement, people come and they're like, what can I do? And it's like, do what you're already good at, what you enjoy, and make that be the thing that you do, because everyone joining this movement should be having fun. Like, it should be fun for us. This should be enjoyable. This should add value to our lives and not cause like detrimental stress, financial, like I have a friend who was a campaign manager and probably spent $20,000 out of his own pocket during the course of a campaign. And that's stuff we don't need that anymore. We need people like not getting into that kind of financial commitment that they're shelling out that kind of money. So I think we need to kind of like, our own mindsets about how we go about this kind of stuff really needs to change. And I want to, in the future, be a much stronger leader. So that's something I'm working on, is how can I be a better leader? And I think I have the ability to be a really good leader. So I'm working on that. And I'm working on trying to set a good example, and like having those clear boundaries is like, what am I willing to take on? That is a great way to show people by leading by example, not burning out, not taking advantage of people's willingness to help.
All right. Well, that's all great. We're running out of time. We're at our hour mark. Jess, tell everybody where they can follow you and learn more about what you're doing.
Follow me on social media. If you're on social media, my handle is Just for Liberty. There's some cool things I'm going to be working on in the near future. I mentioned I'm starting a business. So that business is going to also involve the movement. So there'll be some really big announcements that I'm going to have. And I look forward to, when the time is right, to share what it is that I'm going to be working on.
All right. So everybody, in the description of this video on Facebook and YouTube and Odyssey, you can see the links for Jess's social media. Make sure you go give them a click and give her a follow there. And as always, Jess, thank you so much for joining today. And it was a pleasure talking to you. And I look forward to having you back again.
Thanks for having me on.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. As always, big shout out to our guests and our viewers for making this show worth doing. And make sure you check out the links in the description to follow up and learn more. And as always, check out our sponsored merch over on snackswag.com. I stream this show to Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch live, and everything's uploaded to Odyssey the same day. So make sure you check out our channel on these platforms and help out by liking, following, subscribing, and most of all, sharing the content with your friends. That's all for today. See you guys next time.